they've sort of put things in situ, there has been a ramp up in the last in the last 5 years.
What role do you think that the banking sector would do to drive the rate of foreign investment? Because we know most banks around the world have had problems. I think in the U.S., since the meltdown, close to about 500 banks have have closed shop.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and in Nigeria, we've seen the Central Bank of Nigeria trying to battle the crisis. Do you think that a well-regulated financial sector, as it were, because we have CBN on one part, we have the banks, we have SEC, we have the NSC, we have PENCOM, we have NDIC, we have, I can go on and on. How do you see these agencies, as it were, and their role critically in promoting the growth of foreign investment?
It's absolutely critical, absolutely critical. But let's start from a snapshot of where we are right now in terms of lending. Depending on whose figures you take, you're looking at about 13% as a percentage of GDP lending of the private of the banks to the private sector, or at least sub 30% definitely. So you're well below the the threshold of a lot of other economies. Now the question being, when you talk about regulation, what exactly are you regulating? Because there's been, if you look at how things have trended up until very recently in terms of risk management, we weren't that bullish on it, and so you were seeing huge, and just the structure of the way the industry was structured in terms of high interest rates, very little or relatively little attention to credit processing, very little attention to traditional probability distributions, default distributions. People tell you that it doesn't work in Nigeria, you cannot proxy these, but you can. And we're slowly migrating to a stage where our banks have bulked up and become regional players, and many of them are stepping in that direction. But if you just look at the West African Monetary Union, for example, you've got Nigerian banks in Guinea, you've got us in Ivory Coast, you've got us, if you drive through Freetown, I was in Sierra Leone a few months ago, and you see Nigerian banks with several branches in Freetown, a single bank. So we have become increasingly regional players. Now, on the back of that, we've got to realize that we're regulating not just for the domestic market now, but also for a regional market. Therefore, our regulation and our risk management procedures and our lending procedures have to step up a few notches, because we're being, though we're still regional players, we're becoming international banks. We are international banks now, and a lot of Nigerian banks are in the top 1,000 banks of globally. So at that level, especially with the market caps we're seeing and the regional expansion, you can't afford to leave things as be.
The new Minister of Trade and Investment, who happened to be the former Minister of Finance, Olusegun Aganga, said that there would be a need to create a diasporan fund and also to block leakages and ensure the export and expansion grant, that is the EEG. What do you think that this ministry should do?
I mean, in principle, I see absolutely nothing with attracting a formalized structure of funding. I don't think we have enough funds serving. You compare ourselves to other economies, even within Africa. If you look at, North Africa, you had a lot of funds that would concentrate on the MENA region, and they would, include, North Africa, and they weren't necessarily, as we've seen, although people call these black swan events, but if you look at the recent happenings in Tunisia, in Algeria, all over North Africa, they're not necessarily insulated from their own shocks. They're not necessarily insulated from their own risks. So in principle, I would agree with, funding. It's the structure of the fund. The positioning of the fund. Are they sector agnostic? What will they focus on? What's the management of the fund? Are they going to, do it like a typical private equity fund, whereby you have a GP and you have LPs that, can take on additional investments from DFIs? So I think yes, in principle, but it's always a matter of execution as opposed to principle.
Implementation, isn't it? Okay. Last word from you in 5 seconds. Do you think that Nigeria is investor friendly the way it is right now?
I think we have a long way to go, but I'm satisfied that the trend is moving in the right direction, and I will start worrying when you see a reversal of those trends.
Okay, thank you very much for coming on the program. I've been speaking with Jide Ikako, the Chief Operating Officer at Blackthorn in Mayfair, London. Thank you very much, and a safe trip back.
Thank you very much.
All right, that does it on today's edition of the program. And of course, indeed, this week, please join us again next week. On Monday, bright and early. I am Nancy Lo. Do have a splendid weekend. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How did it go?
I think it was good.
Okay.
I think it was good.